So I want to welcome everyone to our Kelsey Museum March Flash Talk. We are joined by Dr. Paolo Visonà of University of Kentucky, and who is also an alumnus of the IPAMAA program here at U of M. I'm so excited for his talk entitled "A Late Republican Defensive System in Southern Calabria Used Against Spartacus." So I like to welcome Dr. Fasona, and I will turn it over to him. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank the Kelsey Museum for giving me the opportunity to report on the results of our small project in Calabria of 2 years ago. An unwritten rule in archaeology says that you're going to make a significant find in the last field season when you least expect it. And that's exactly what happened to my team in Calabria, Italy's southernmost region, 2 years ago. Since 2005, we had been investigating Greek rural fortifications at Monte Palazzi and Bregatorto in the hinterland of Locri Pisefiri, one of the most prominent Greek cities in the area. Most recently, our research was focused on the Melia Ridge, a high ridge between the eastern and western coasts of Calabria, where the Locrian fort of Bregatorto was built. This gives you an idea of the length from north-south of the ridge, which is about 24 kilometers, rising to over 1,000 meters above sea level. This ridge was frequented since prehistory. For millennia, its flat summit had been a natural highway connected to the eastern and the western coasts by multiple trails. In the late 1980s, a Calabria scholar suggested that a battlefield of Spartacus' war with Rome was located on this ridge. And over the years, we had been shown various structures the local informants claimed to be Roman walls, but turned out to be a few centuries old. Therefore, when three environmentalists showed us photos of an enigmatic wall in the woods near Bregatorto, we were intrigued. This wall had been hiding in plain sight, even though two mountain trails run by it. Hikers who saw it had paid no attention. The Italian authorities were also unaware of it. Dry built with granitic stones, ranging in width between 0.85 meters to 1.6 meters, and preserved at one point up to 5 courses. The wall is oriented east-west. Its proximity to the Pass of Cancello, the narrowest point of the Melia Ridge, suggests that it was designed to impede access to this pass to travelers approaching from the south on the ridgetop road. The very name of the pass, meaning the Pass of the Gate, hints at its strategic function. After ascending a steep hillside as a stone structure, the wall becomes an embankment that barely rises above the surrounding terrain in places where it is heavily eroded. Its east-west course, and you can look at what the embankment looks like on the right, just above the meter stick. Its east-west course is interrupted by ephemeral drainages and water courses. This embankment crosses two plateaus and descends from over 1,000 meters above sea level to a lower elevation, where it turns southward and ends near an impassable ravine. A continuous gully that you see on the left of the meter stick is also visible on the southern side of the structure, and field walking confirmed its presence along the entire length of the embankment. This suggested that it could be an ancient ditch. After our GPS tracking data showed that the stone wall and the embankment were at least 2.7 kilometers long, it became apparent that these features were not recent boundary markers. The route can be seen when the GPS track is overlain on a LiDAR digital terrain model of the area. As our inspection indicated, the wall and ditch could be an ancient fortification. The archaeological superintendents of Calabria granted us a permit to test this hypothesis using non-invasive techniques. However, because of time constraints, only limited investigations could be carried out in the brief period allowed by the permit. Our main goal in 2024 was to document the presence and dimensions of the ditch in 3 sections of the wall line, designated as Area 1, 2, and 3. You can see them in blue across the yellow line that represents the east-west route of the wall and ditch. To determine the width and depth of the ditch, we used GPR, magnetometry, and sediment core sampling. The cores were made with a 2.5 centimeter wide steel probe to record differences in color, structure, and texture of the buried sediments comprising the ditch and the embankment. 3 to 4 sediment cores were taken, one outside the ditch to show the natural sediments, 1 or 2 cores within the ditch, and 1 core at the top of the embankment. Initially, GPR profiles were made across the embankment in each survey area. However, a malfunction of the GPR unit corrupted the radar data and made them unusable. A magnetometry grid was collected only in Area 3, located between the other 2 areas. This grid measured 10 meters east-west by 20 meters north-south and extended from the top of the embankment to well outside the limits of the ditch. The resulting magnetic image shows a distinct edge along the embankment corresponding to the surface features, but it also shows a very distinct edge to the ditch, which is not apparent on the surface. Over the short distance in which the magnetic data were collected, the ditch varies from 6 to 8 meters in width. Core sampling showed that in this area, the ditch appears to have been excavated into a substratum consisting of degraded bedrock up to a depth of 90 to 100 centimeters. Based on a single diameter core, the embankment appears to be composed of highly organic loam. Core sampling also revealed the presence of the ditch in areas 1 and 2. The sedimentary sequence in area 1, the westernmost, is quite deep. It is composed of an organic dark brown to black loam, grading into a dark brown loam, and then into a brown loam overlying a yellow-brown clay loam subsoil. The upper strata consist of thick organic deposits that are due to the buildup of soil at this lower elevation. At about 160 centimeters below ground surface, there is a transition to a distinct brown clay loam. The ditch was probably excavated in this layer, as the slight dip visible in the profile suggests. Based on coring, the ditch in area 1 may have had a depth of about 6.5 meters. In contrast, the embankment core is capped with a brown loam containing some gravel. The sequence of strata is similar to that of the ditch, but includes charcoal flags, a charcoal lens, and pebbles, suggesting mixing and redeposition of materials when the embankment was built. It seems likely that the ditch was dug deeply enough to bring up sediment from the brown loam, and that this is the last layer thrown on top of the embankment in the construction sequence. The sediment cores from area 2 yielded additional data. In this area, the easternmost of the 3 survey areas, the terrain is more rugged. Even though it was impossible to place the first core outside the presumed ditch zone because of tree roots, cores 2 to 4 show a shallower sequence of sediments overlying a layer of brown, gravelly sand that appears to be decomposing bedrock. Bedrock was encountered at a depth of 67 centimeters in core 2, near the southern limits of the ditch. and at a depth of 51 centimeters in core 3, in the central area of the ditch. In core 4, near the top of the embankment, stone was found at a depth of 48 centimeters. But it was not clear if this was bedrock or just a stone in the matrix of the embankment that inhibited the probe. The presence of shallow bedrock could explain why the ditch was not cut more deeply into the gravelly sand. If it can be assumed that the ditch had defensive functions, it would have needed reinforcement by the construction of a higher rampart at this location. Overall, the results of the geomagnetic survey of the soil core sampling are consistent and attest to the presence of a ditch along the southern side of the embankment in 3 separate areas. Follow-up research conducted by an Italian team in the fall of 2024 has corroborated these findings and has determined that the full length of the wall and ditch is actually 3.3 kilometers. In the 3 areas that we investigated, the width of the ditch ranges from circa 3 to 8 meters. Its depth varies from circa 50 to 160 centimeters. There are no indications that these fieldworks could be prehistoric, Greek, late Roman, Byzantine, or medieval. On the other hand, ditches of comparable dimensions are known from Roman fortifications in France, England, and Germany that have been dated stratigraphically to the second quarter of the 1st century BCE. This suggests that the ditch and wall could belong to a late Republican defensive system. Several GPS-referenced metal detector finds from the area to the south of the embankment may corroborate our preliminary interpretation. These are fragments of iron implements and include a bent, sharpened javelin point, a presumed hilt with a flat tang, and various curved blades. Some blade fragments may belong to combat knives or to utensils such as reaping hooks that could also be used as weapons. A conical implement, identifiable as the butt cap of a spear or a pommel, was found to the north of the wall. The most intriguing object is a copper alloy stud or fastener whose function has not yet been determined. The javelin point has close comparanda with pilum points datable between 75 and 50 BCE. The presumed hilt tang and the blades also have parallels ranging in date from the second quarter of the 1st century BCE to the early 1st century CE. Even though none of these items are diagnostic, their association with the defensive system is noteworthy and points to the area encompassed by the ditch and wall as a conflict landscape. There is no mention in the literary sources that extensive fieldworks were built in this area of Calabria during other conflicts, like the social war in the early 1st century BCE or the civil wars after the death of Caesar. The presence of these defenses presupposes the deployment of sizable forces, such as those available to Marcus Licinius Crassus when he attempted to blockade Spartacus in the southernmost part of Calabria towards the end of the Third Servile War. Only Crassus is known to have built major fortifications in this region. Among all the ancient literary sources that discuss Spartacus' war, Frontinus, Plutarch, and Appian, 3 writers of the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, mention Crassus' defenses. Frederick Verwijt, a modern historian at the University of Melbourne, suggested that Crassus was given the command of the war against Spartacus late in 72 BCE, after Spartacus had defeated all his Roman opponents. Then Spartacus retreated into southern Italy and reached the Strait of Messina. When his plan to cross over to Sicily failed, he withdrew into the hinterland of Rhegium, in the toe of Italy, where Crassus' legions caught up with him. Crassus began to build fortifications across what Plutarch called the isthmus, a narrow neck of land, after inspecting the terrain. Plutarch wrote that Crassus' defenses consisted of a ditch and a wall. The ditch ran from sea to sea, says Plutarch, for a length of 300 stadia, about 54 kilometers, and was 15 feet, i.e. 4 to 0.4 meters deep and wide. The wall, he added, was of astonishing height and strength. Plutarch also pointed out that even if this project was enormous and fraught with difficulty, it was carried out in a short period of time, contrary to all expectations. Appian simply wrote that Crassus blockaded Spartacus with a ditch, a wall, and a palisade. Frontinus mentioned only the ditch by which Spartacus had been surrounded. The ditch thus appears to have been the main tactical obstacle faced by Spartacus's army. Spartacus eventually managed to break through Crassus' defenses and slip away. But even if this was a serious setback for Crassus, it was a turning point in the war because it was followed by a split in the slave army. This allowed Crassus to bring Spartacus to a decisive battle, which crushed the revolt. Since the 16th century, most modern scholars who have discussed the Spartacus War have accepted Plutarch's account at face value. The isthmus has generally been assumed to be the strip of land separating the Gulf of Santa Eufemia from the Gulf of Squillace. However, no traces of Crassus' ditch and wall have ever been found in this area. Only in the last 30 years have some historians proposed that Crassus built fortifications closer to the Strait of Messina. In their view, Crassus' defenses would have followed a route across the Melia ridge. The Greeks of Locri and Pisaphyria recognized the importance of this ridge when they built a fortification at Bregatorto. Perched on the western boundary of their territory, this fort monitored traffic on a network of trails and potential invasion routes. The results of our excavations at this site indicate that it may have been destroyed during the Second Punic War. Although less than 2% of the area inside the fort has been excavated, the ceramic finds include fragments of late Republican cookingware datable to the early 1st century BCE. This suggests that the fort was revisited in the late Republican period. 10 kilometers to the west of the Melia Ridge, at Contradamela, a large settlement of an Italic people was destroyed in the first half of the 1st century, possibly by Spartacus. A hoard of silverware buried near Taureana on the western coast of Calabria has also been linked to Spartacus' presence in the area. These clues support the possibility that Spartacus' forces were in the vicinity of the Melia Ridge and that Crassus blocked the ridgetop road to prevent the slave army from using it as an escape route. An army traveling north on the ridgetop road would have to go through the pass of Cancelo, which is flanked by precipitous ravines. Tactical considerations must therefore have played a role in determining the configuration of this defensive system. Direct access to the pass was sealed off by the stone wall. Steep drop-offs at both ends of the complex prevented an advancing force from flanking these defenses. A confined space without practical escape outlets was created. The geomorphology of these plateaus may explain the bow-shaped design of the defensive system. It may have been easier and faster to excavate the ditch following the contour between the main drainages than to excavate the ditch in a straight line. The presence of shallow bedrock may also have determined the course and dimensions of the ditch. The ditch and wall inhibited any movement across the plateaus to the south of the ditch and blocked the ridgetop road that probably traversed them. If these tablelands were as densely wooded in antiquity as they are today, they would have been clear-cut, both to create an open field of battle, and to provide timber for the palisade and for watchtowers. A viewshed analysis has shown that lookouts standing atop an 8-meter-tall tower built near Area 1 in the central sector of the Roman lines could have monitored movement at least as far as 300 meters to the south. 300 meters is the maximum effective range for infantry archers and slingers aiming at large groups of assailants. Inherent military probability thus suggests that a frontal assault on these entrenched positions would have been easily repulsed. To conclude, converging lines of evidence point to the possibility that the ditch and wall identified near the pass of Cancelo are the remains of the fortifications built by Crassus' troops. If so, some of the broken iron implements could be related to this defensive system and to attempts by Spartacus' forces to break through the Roman lines. However, the value of this material for identifying the plateaus to the south of the ditch as a battlefield of the Spartacus War cannot be fully discerned until more proxy evidence is available. Datable finds might include arrow points, slingshot bullets, and militaria typical of late Republican conflict landscapes, such as hobnails from military footwear. The likelihood that the ditch and wall represent a lay Republican defensive system must also be corroborated by ground truthing and interdisciplinary investigations, including paleobotanical and radiometric analysis. Since Crassus' defenses against Spartacus have hitherto been discussed almost exclusively by historians, it is significant that some physical evidence can now be set against Plutarch's and Appian's descriptions of these fortifications. On present evidence, the location, orientation, and apparent width of the ditch do not contradict Plutarch's account. The defensive system built near the Pass of Cancelo did require knowledge of military tactics and of the physical environment, as well as a large labor force. Under these conditions, it could have been completed within a relatively short time. These considerations evoke Plutarch's description of Crassus' project. However, this ditch and wall are only 3.3 kilometers long and do not reach the Ionian and Tyrrhenian coasts. Perhaps a system of palisades and guard posts yet to be located extended these fieldworks to the coastal plains. Initial observations have also revealed considerable variance in the dimensions of the ditch, lack of uniformity in the line of defense, and other vulnerabilities, such as the gaps in the fortification due to natural obstacles, could have been exploited by a determined assailant. But even this interpretation is tentative. Reconciling the archaeological and literary evidence is never going to be easy and remains open to interpretation, as Mike Bishop pointed out. Only a multi-focused approach, including a comprehensive metal detector survey and targeted excavations, may provide new insight into this defensive system. Thanks for listening.
Great. Thank you so much. Now is the point where we open up for questions from our audience. So you can feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions, or if you feel more comfortable putting that in the chat, I can read those out. Okay, we already have our first question, so I'll go ahead. From Kristen, you mentioned historians suggest the ditch was the primary obstruction, but have you found wall remnants in addition to the metal tool fragments you discovered?
This is a good question. Can you explain what you mean by wood fragments? We have found that one of the iron implements had remains of wood. It was actually not our discovery because we turned over all the metal finds to the archaeological superintendents of Calabria, and they reported in November of 2024 that one blade had remains of wood attached to it. I would have expected them to also conduct a radiometric analysis of the wood, but apparently this has not happened. Perhaps the sample was contaminated. But yes, it is quite possible that there may be wood remains. We did, after all, find charcoal in the embankment in one of our survey areas. Again, we did not have the time to process or even keep that sample. We literally have less than 2 weeks to conduct our investigations, but we did note the presence of charcoal. So hoping that a cross-section of the wall and ditch can be excavated in the near future, the possibility of finding organic remains is very high.
Let's see, we have another question in our chat from Ellen Lynch. Outstanding presentation. So what comes next? Will you continue your work there?
It's another great question, but I'm afraid to disappoint you. Since the spring of 2024, this project has been entirely taken over by the archaeological superintendents of Calabria, which has received a major funding by Italy's Ministry of Culture. As recently as last fall, it was announced that a sum approaching $500,000 had been allocated for further investigations of this structure. I suppose that I spent all that kind of money in 30 years of field work in Calabria, and now all of a sudden it is available for just this project. So one hopes that the archaeological authorities will use it and use it very soon to conduct excavations. I've been told informally that the plan is to begin this spring. So let's hope that over the next couple of months, this will come to pass.
Will you be involved in the next steps?
Probably only as a consultant, if the superintendency agrees to ask for any role on my part.
Great, thank you.
I told the Ministry of Culture 2 years ago that this was a project that would have involved easily several universities. I hope that this recommendation will be implemented because when you're dealing with a defensive system that is 2 miles long, and we don't know how wide, both to the south and north of the ditch and wall, obviously this is something that cannot be undertaken by just one entity.
Yes, that makes sense. So do we foresee a follow-up flash talk?
It's possible, but at this point, it might be better if one of the Italian members of the superintendents of Calabria is involved, because they have had, exclusive an exclusive role in advancing this project for the last year and a half. I'm surprised that nothing happened last year, but I know that there are competing jurisdictions in the region, so that the superintendents had to obtain permission by the Aspromonte National Park, in whose land the site is located. In fact, the site is within a nature reserve classed as an A reserve, which means that in theory there's no public access to it, and the park has been reluctant in the past to grant permits for invasive investigations.
Hmm, interesting. We have another question from Colleen. Um, what would you like to see as conclusive evidence that this wall was part of fortifications against Spartacus?
I would like to see, first of all, the results of a test excavation that provides for the first time a cross section of the ditch and wall, possibly in the western half of the complex, because both our team and the Italian team that conducted an independent follow-up investigation in the fall of 2024 have explored the central area of the complex. I would like to see the results of that test excavation. And of course, I would like to see radiometric data from the charcoal and possibly other organic remains attesting to the date of the complex in the second quarter of the first century BCE. And of course, I can't wait to see datable finds ranging from tent pegs to hobnails to slingshot bullets, possibly even coins. Coins will be, of course, the most closely datable item that would attach a definitive date to the complex.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
without excavation, we cannot have a conclusive identification. Everything I told you is highly preliminary. It requires ground truthing. Unless we have a controlled, targeted excavation that provides conclusive evidence, we can still not be entirely sure that this system is lay Republican.
Well, I think at this time it is 12:30, so I think we will conclude our flash talk with Dr. Visonà. I thank everyone for joining us today, and special thanks for Dr. Visonà, for your presentation today, for being with us and answering our questions. We really appreciate it.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you very much.